was there. We spoke of was and when, although I wasn't there. He said I was his friend, which came as some surprise. I spoke into his eyes. I thought you died alone a long, long time ago. Oh no, not me. I never lost control. Your face to face with the man who sold the world.
Chapter 22. Repression ruins Catholics. We're taught to put our natural needs out of mind. We're reminded to feel guilty even for considering a sin of the flesh. Carol hated sitting in the St. Augustine's rectory. Her thoughts ran wild while the priest across from her continued babbling. These strange men objectified her without understanding their attraction. She was there to sign papers for her mother's funeral and pay the fee to ensure she made it to heaven. Father Lorenzo ceased his sermon about doubt and his illusions of wanting to fuck her, and instead bloviated about death, tossing out the usual better place, God's plan, watching over us bullshit that never worked on her as a child. Carol heard the inflections in his voice and raised her eyebrows or pouted her lips in sync. His words were hollow. She signed a check and put the list of chores in her purse. Those people out there are all searching for redemption, he said. And you sell them on the idea that you have it, Carol answered. You don't believe in this, do you, Carol? No. But your mother did. She waited. And you are doing this for her. It was a half question, and she despised the trickery. Yes. She's dead, the priest continued. Why would she care? She wouldn't even know, right? That's what you would say late at night, with firm belief and such coolness, while you blab about this being nonsense to make yourself feel better. You refuse to associate with us. But you're here. She remained silent. We must be some pretty good salesmen. Staying for Mass stirred up only an unwanted familiarity. Carol imagined her mother's casket in the center aisle, and she could smell the incense. She left the church with communion in her mouth. No one noticed. It would have been blasphemous in her childhood. Her heels clicked across the cement, and the old men said their good mornings while they ogled her as she continued down the hill. A neighbor smoking a cigarette expressed his condolences. Carol did not care for any of these people. Her mother was different. Carol answered her vibrating phone inside the house. Carolyn, I'm sorry to hear about Lucy. Thank you, Samuel. I'll be out of town for the funeral. I'm sorry. No apologies, Sam. I understand. How are you, kiddo? He asked. I'm about to faint. Breathe, he advised. She hung up the phone and wandered through her childhood home. Floor-to-ceiling mirrors complemented the multi-shaded beige rug that had once been uniform. Gray-paneled walls were tinted yellow on their edges of the nave plastic molding that touched a popcorn drop ceiling panel. A Belmont Steaks ashtray remained a presence in the drain board. These memories were haunted by the ghosts of gambling addiction. The arguments over money and infidelity echoed. One-night stands were far less damaging than the 4-month stays or the ever-present at the holidays boyfriends. It was nothing if not honest. Twisted accidents of misdirected romance and confused adults bred an exceptional want and strong distrust of men within her. Chairman would not call. That little shit Andrew would sign the company card and not say a word to her face. Jeff could provide some fleeting comfort. She opted for a cigarette from her mother's last pack of Virginia Slims. The lighter was one of those cheap neon green contraptions where you could see the lighter fluid and the wheel spun too quickly. Lucy accepted whatever the corner deli's owner threw into her plastic bag, and it was never a Bic. Carol held the instructions from the priest at eye level. An uncle or a cousin had worked out the funeral arrangements for his company years before. He was scarcely present after he made the sale. The flowers were understated. She would have rather had her mother cremated. The private viewing would be Carol sitting alone in a funeral parlor, alternating between deep breaths and tearful meditation to prepare for the church. Most of it was done. No living family member would attend, so Carol kept the obituary short. It read, Lucille DiCarlo, née Mahoney, February 16th, 1935 to May 9th, 2017. Loving mother of Carolyn. She went to the closet to find her mother's purple dress from the photo albums. Her mother seemed lighter then. She had a reason to have a heel kicked up. Now the smell of tobacco and bad memories were baked into it. Carol flopped onto her mother's bed with a cigarette still dangling from her mouth. It added to the collection of burn marks. This neighborhood is obsessed with death. It is all they can think about, and they run in place until they get there. The funeral would be Wednesday, and the forecast called for rain. Her repast would be a Starbucks prepackaged salad before a dinner meeting. Carol stepped to the pulpit. She looked out on the small crowd of memorable faces with consciously forgotten names. She had no grandchildren, no close relatives, few friends. Lucille was a loner who had me late in life. When my father died, her nervous breakdowns became more frequent. Then, the parade of unsavory men through my teenage years left me looking for the same. Sometimes, our suitors knew each other. When I left for college, Lucille asked me not to return. Now I'm supposed to celebrate her life. A senile woman smoked herself to death. She doesn't need to be celebrated. My mother is dead, and I'm alone. And I'm lucky she's no longer here to remind me. Cigarette ash singed the mattress. Carol heard it sizzle, and the smell of burnt cotton jarred her from her dream. She caught her breath. The funeral was silent, and the eulogy of her dreams remained unspoken. She finished a double espresso and a cake donut. Her mother would have reminded her about her weight. The woman left her nothing to make peace with. She ate a salad at a steakhouse and made it quick. Of course, that meant lowering the ask of the donor by about 10 grand. Donors were a fickle bunch. But this was routine, along with biting winters, traffic jams, and constant construction. White-collar crime was generational. The puppets were a problem, so they created civic images. Foundations and schools popped up in the swankiest zip codes. The estates of their forefathers were sold, and office spaces mirrored investment firms. Security would be sure to keep out the people they wanted to help. This ungodly knocking at the door of requests and bequests had her in and out of every foyer along Conshohocken State Road. She was busy enough to feel safe and scared of the chance no one would hear her scream. She lost herself among client birthdays and office politics. Corruption ran through generations in this town. The poor continued to get screwed, not duped. These people were ruthless. but they had degrees and lawyers. They would generate the revenue needed to serve their self-interests. There were buffers between themselves and their deeds. Carol showed up, smiled, maybe smirked at an old pervert or two, and got a pat on the back from her bosses. Her talking points were refreshed every few years with the addition of housing units or a youth program, but essentially they remained the same. She was in so many rooms daily. She worked to remember the names and any tidbits of conversations from the past. But it was all a blur. This business is about relationships, Esquire once told her. Except it's not. It's about the perception of them. It's all a rush for your imagination. Jeff was on a bender and welcomed her invitation through text. Carol could surmise what was going on at home and knew he was ready to pounce on anything she threw his way. She thought about trading intimate pictures with strangers online, without her face, of course. Jeff was nursing his previous night's hangover with coke. Her sultry, "I can't sleep," through his phone evened him out. He found himself crunchy-eyed, navigating the highway with the glow of orange lights as his only guide. Carol was often envious of the teachers or the kitchen staff at People for Good centers. Then, she would notice their shoes, or their crow's feet. She snapped back into her insulated world and fixed herself in the mirror. When Jeff arrived, they attempted a clumsy kiss on her doorstep. He gazed her breast through her robe, but passion was still lacking and crowded by their history. He sunk into her couch, and she could see he was ill. "We're getting a divorce," he mumbled. "Probably the first of many, Jeff." "She threw me out." "What about your daughter?" "I'll never see her again." "Not without a fight, right?" He shrugged. Carol wanted to tell him not to be an absent father, but his indifference was the last thing that little girl needed in her life. The miserable sight of Jeff on her couch did not alleviate the pain of her mother's death. His 5 o'clock shadow and red eyes were complemented by sweat and cigarette smoke. She tightened her robe and brought him a cold can of ginger ale. "I'm sorry about your mom," Jeff said. Carol nodded. Jeff knew about Lucille, but never met her. He only heard the stories from his lover on the rare occasions they spent time together after their trysts. They would stare at the ceiling and share their trauma. Carol DiCarlo would never be showered as a bride or for a baby. She was her mother's greatest envy. She questioned her meaning and how she attempted, unsuccessfully, to fill the void. The men who loved her were not what she desired. "Why are they so sad?" Carol asked. "Their energy attracts them to one another." None of these characters would make sense with a sunny disposition. About 10 years in, the bright veneers become useless. They no longer make up for the naivety and lack of funds. Saying financial resources softened the reality. Being polite towed a fine line between being a leader and being a weasel. The goal is to be welcoming, but not friendly. Too much friendliness up front is off-putting. Life hadn't changed much since the days spent on the thin yet overgrown Roxborough lawns. The chain-link fences were cool to the touch from the autumn air, and the touch football games with the older boys were uncomfortable and often frightening. "No fair," Carol giggled. Her platform shoes and bell-bottoms were not designed for the terrain. Paul's grip was gentle on her wrist. His playful pass interference went uncalled. She smiled at him, and they shared an adolescent confusion. His grip was tighter on second down. She laughed it off, and again the pass was incomplete. Mixed company kept everyone distracted. On third down, he was able to pull her closer. It was not a friendly hug. His belt buckle branded her thigh through the light denim covering her legs. The play seemed to go on forever. Another incomplete pass hit the dirt. They lined up again, and on the snap, they tumbled to the ragweed. "Let me go," Carol declared. Her voice was pitch perfect to garner attention and not embarrass him. Joey and Janet were busy planning their lives on the lawn. It was before they understood distance and whores. "All right, just the boys," Paul called. He never broke eye contact with Carol. The girls assumed their positions without question on the sideline. Carol lit a cigarette and lumbered toward them. "Let's do something else," she said. "Ain't nothing better to do, Carol." She forgot who said it. A minuscule joint circulated, but Carol passed and focused on the game. "Where'd you get this?" "My cousin's friend. It's really good." They had no idea what they were doing, and Carol could not listen to this conversation again. She lit another stolen Winston. In a puff, Paul tackled one of the other boys harder than he ever had. The other boys surrounded the kid on the ground. He was from another neighborhood. They told Paul to cool off. The boy's blood was everywhere. Girls screamed and Carol puffed. Paul was stunned, but not quite remorseful. He kept his eyes on Carol. She thought about him buying the peach schnapps a few years later, on the night she was ambushed. In the moment, turning away and calmly asking a neighbor to call an ambulance saved that boy's life. As they grew, Carol looked toward the future. She never had a boyfriend from the neighborhood, and that bothered them. He was not the first, but he was the gentlest. They had a subtle rhythm that made her forget what was happening and grapple with the guilt and confusion of a moment's pleasure for the rest of her life. Paul didn't come. Most of the other boys didn't. He botched a suicide at 21 and remained a burden on his family until they neglected him completely at 25. He was dead in 6 months. Lucy told her about the funeral, and Carol found the opportunity to tell her truth. She stumbled through a difficult 3-minute speech, searching for almost every word to describe the slow-motion blur of her experience, a rape that had occurred nearly a decade before. "What were you wearing?" Lucy asked. "How many of your boyfriends were there?" "Mom." "Some girls regret their decisions, honey. It's normal." "Mom, listen to me." "I'm tired, dear." Carol returned to the present and writhed in her mother's bed while Jeff pinned her wrists to the mattress. They stared at the ceiling together, following their tryst. "When is the funeral?" he asked. "You missed it," Carol said. They slept, and Jeff was gone in the morning. Barefoot, Carol walked to the lawn to enjoy the sunlight and the morning dew. She could hear the laughter of children coming from the local playground. She never found the shoes she left there the night her virginity was stolen. The cool blades of grass beneath her feet kept her grounded and distracted.